Kala makhdi patwi, kala sarturan, kala zanarikram, rana uzakurta, khaldeshin khalewi, pa makhdi protwa, jana nalaro, watanuno ki usigi, yara taukum, tera taya. خوب لیداله جیان میراشی بیای خلوه حاله دنیا نلانده کلا زناری کرم رانا و زکورتا خالدشین خاله وی با مخده پروتوا جانا نلانده.
She is the longest serving female member of the West Virginia House of Delegates. Delegate Fleshauer, a graduate of WVU College of Law, was later elected president of West Virginia National Organization for Women. She is running for the state senate for the 13th district in the next election. We have two people moderating questions who will introduce themselves next.
Yes, and Sue, if you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Ibtisam Sue Barazi. I am the Vice President of the Islamic Association of West Virginia here in Charleston, West Virginia. And I just completed my term as a president of the West Virginia Interfaith Refugee Ministry, but I am really a retired assistant area director with OSHA. And ever since my retirement, I work to build bridges among faith community. So I work a lot with the interfaith community, and my aim is to build bridges where there are walls, so we can tear up those walls and spread understanding between our faith, and have a peace and humanity among all of us. Thank you so much.
All right, and I'm Amy Thompson. I'm the chair of the Department of World Languages, Literatures, and Linguistics and the Eberly College of Arts and Sciences at West Virginia University. And I'm also the Director of International Relations and Strategic Planning for the college. I'm delighted to be here moderating this event. I'll be moderating primarily the chat function. And so if you have questions that you don't want to ask out loud, please feel free to type those questions into the chat. We will take all questions at the end, and Sue will be also moderating the verbal question asking. But if you think of a question as the panelists are speaking, feel free to go ahead and type the question in your chat, and we'll be, getting those as they come. If you want to ask a question, but you prefer to remain anonymous, you're free to direct message me, and that way only I can see your question, and then I can ask it anonymously for you. So welcome everyone, and now I am going to turn it over to Barbara. You're muted, Barbara. Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you for helping me figure out how to navigate here. I am so happy to be here today, which I just noticed that President Gee of the WVU is on the call. Today was WVU Day at the legislature, which is why I have all this blue and gold on. But this is an issue that we're going to be talking about today that is international, obviously, and I'm really excited that the libraries and all the different departments at WVU have agreed to participate in this. It is a very important issue. It's one that I personally am worried about, and I'm really thrilled that we have these incredible panelists. I want to start out by introducing our first speaker, who is Eleanor Smeal. She is currently the president and co-founder of the Feminist Majority Foundation, but I've known Ellie since I was in high school, and I'm really, really glad she was able to be here today. I know her as a NOW activist. She was national president of the National Organization for Women and led the charge to try to get the Equal Rights Amendment enacted during the 70s and the 80s. And she's still at it. She is still working to get women to be included in our US Constitution so that we will have fairness for everyone. But she has done a lot of writing and is a graduate of Duke, and she is still working hard. She has been working on the issue of women in Afghanistan for a couple of decades. And so we've asked her to start with a historical perspective, because it's so hard to figure out how we should regard the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan and how we can help in any way that wouldn't be in the way. So Ellie, why don't you start?
Well, thank you very, very much, Barbara. And it's always good to work with you. Yes, you were that young, right? We were always young once. Anyway, I've been involved in so has the Feminist Majority Foundation in the Afghanistan fight for equality for women, I think since about 1997, so it's about 25 years. We got involved because at that time, the Taliban had taken over Kabul in 1996. This is the first time. And when they came in, they started to pass all these edicts or issue them. There was no democracy, they just issued them. And women couldn't go to school, girls couldn't go to school, they couldn't be employed. Those were like ones you can maybe understand, but it kept getting worse and worse. Essentially, at that time, Afghanistan had a fairly well-developed medical system in which women were nurses and doctors. They had an educational system in which women were, especially for the elementary schools, a large portion of the teaching staff. And people were employed. The girls in high school played soccer. I mean, it was approaching to become a constitutional democracy. There was a turnover to a leftist regime. We then, which was supported by the then Soviet Union, we, the United States then, and I'm going to try to do this real fast, but I think it can, if you understand this, the geopolitical thing is very important. We supported Mujahideen, which means armies of God. And we supported them to fight the Soviet-controlled dictatorship. When I say we, the United States of America, CIA operation. And then basically, the Soviet Union leaves and quits their fight. And shortly thereafter, have other problems. But basically, of the Mujahideen, the Taliban was the most extreme unit. And they take over the country essentially in 1996. We get interested because of the horrendous edicts that they were passing. Women's shoes couldn't be make noise. They couldn't wear white socks. They had to be covered from head to toe. They couldn't travel outside the home without having a male companion, family member. Some of them, their family members have been killed in wars. So it goes on like that. 1995, I want to set the stage. The United Nations had the Fourth World Conference on Women, in which you've now heard many times, Hillary Clinton, as the First Lady, said, women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. But that wasn't just what Hillary said. The entire conference, which was in China, had that theme. Here it is just a couple of years later, every human right taken away from women and not a peep out of any country. I couldn't believe it. In fact, I kept saying, maybe it's being exaggerated in very small AP articles. So we decided to research and find out what was really going on. And we went to the State Department, we went to the United Nations, we went to all kinds of international organizations. And what we found is it was worse than we could have imagined. And we got involved at that time fighting that they not be recognized for their human rights violations. And in March of 1998, the United States, coupled with the United Nations, came out against recognition. And I think largely our campaign had a lot to do with it. We did huge amounts of research and found out that one of the reasons we have been supporting it is that Unicol, which no longer exists, it's now part of Chevron, but it was going to build a pipeline through an oil and gas pipeline through Afghanistan to a port in Pakistan. And a lot of major countries were involved, including the United States. And we began to see that maybe they wanted a dictatorship, which could not nationalize the oil resources. And maybe that was what this was about. So we took after Unicol, saying that by them helping to support a dictatorship that was so cruel, they had blood on their hands. I'm going real fast. They eventually pull out of Afghanistan. And I think the visualization of it, I wish I could put up a poster, but our poster had a woman covered from head to toe with a gas fuel system pointed at her head. It was breathtaking, and it sent the message very fast. After the invasion by, the collapse of the Taliban was because of the 9/11. The reaction was that Saddam Hussein was in Afghanistan and being supported by the Taliban. And so United States entered in a bombing, terrible bombing. And then after that, they promised that they would help restore a democracy. And when we get involved again, we try to help the Afghan process of not only creating a democracy, but essentially recognizing that women's rights are imperative in a modern democracy. And the government formed a Ministry of Women Affairs. They formed a Human Rights Commission for the entire country that guarded equal rights, not only on the basis of sex, but also on the basis of religion, and also on the basis of minority ethnic groups which were discriminated against. Anyway, it's been 20 years now of increasing rights for women, girls' rights to go to school. Before the collapse that occurred on August 15th, girls were about now 40% of the school children. I'm talking about elementary, it was around 40% also way to high school, maybe not quite as much. And about 25% of the college students, women were back to being doctors and lawyers. And there were women's rights organizations in all the provinces. Domestic violence shelters were open, et cetera. I could go through all the really steps for on the drive to equality. The shocking.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to jump in because we need to keep a kind of a strict time limit for all the panelists, right, that we can stay on time. But I know I've been jotting down things you were saying. Thank you so much. I have lots of questions when we get to the Q&A section, but let's transition to our next speaker. And panelists, if I could remind you to please pay attention to the chat. I'm private chatting you your timing information as you go. All right, thank you.
Sure. Amy, maybe, so our next speaker is Parween Mascari, and I'm delighted that she has joined us because she will take us from the last 20 years when women had increasing equality, and she has firsthand knowledge about that, having been, she's calls herself a Halfghan, so she's I know she's part Afghanistan and that she has worked with Afghan women judges. She's a lawyer, she's been a lawyer in Morgantown, and she has family members there. So maybe you can bring us up to date with what is going on in Afghanistan now and tell us how your family members are doing and have been doing. Thank you, Parween.
Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me to this. I am humbled to be on this panel because most of the people I think on the panel know more about Afghanistan and what's going on over there than I do. But I will tell you, I did grow up Halfghan. My father was born in Afghanistan and came over to the United States to study, where he met my mother, and she fell so in love with him that she went over there and they were married. I don't pretend to know that much other than what my personal story is, but I think it's a pretty compelling one. I didn't really know much about Afghanistan other than reading The Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns and reading Rumi poetry growing up. But then about a dozen years ago, I got a call from the State Department asking me to participate with Afghan women lawyers and judges in a tour of DC, where we met with Secretary at the time Hillary Clinton and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and different folks to talk about what Afghan women needed in their country. And at that time, my response, because I didn't know much about these issues, is there are Afghan women lawyers and judges. And so going back to what Dr. Smeal was talking about, that was a revelation to me. Now, fast forward to mid-August, and I wake up getting ready to start my day, and I have some messages that I've received in the middle of the night from family in Afghanistan telling me that the United States president has pulled the troops out of Afghanistan. We are scared for our lives. We don't know what to do. Can you help us? I don't know anything about immigration law. I don't know anything about rescuing people from foreign countries that are in dire need of assistance, but their messages were very serious to me. And so I immediately went and contacted the only person that I knew that did immigration law was a lawyer I worked with named Tanya Miller. Some of you may know, who worked at Jackson Kelly, and asked her what I should do. The issues were several, and it goes back to the Taliban not wanting women to be in the workplace or to get educated, because that's how you keep people in line, I guess. My niece was worried because she studied engineering and would not be able to continue with those studies. My half-sister, who was over there, was worried also. She worked in finance, and that would not be seen as a female profession if women were going to be allowed to work at all. And then they were worried, I know this is women's rights we're talking about, but my nephew, they were worried about him because he was of the age that they would basically conscript him into the army. And so that was a concern as well, because he also wanted to continue his studies and become educated. After talking to Tanya, she wasn't able to directly help me, but she put me in touch with the WVU College of Law's Immigration Clinic, who were wonderful. And I hope we get to hear from them because they can give a lot more specifics on issues that I just know a little bit about. But I did contact them. I also got into contact with our two senators, Senator Manchin and Senator Capito, both of whom were happy to sit down and talk with me about these issues. And I'm still working with their offices to try to help get these folks over here and continue their education. I'm happy to report that my niece has been admitted to WVU. She has been working with the Global Affairs Office and wants to continue her education here. The issues with regard to other family members are more difficult. If you didn't work for a US government contractor or work with other organizations to help as interpreters or other things, then it's more difficult. You fill out applications for humanitarian parole, you seek asylum, you do things that are outside the normal visa process to try to get into the country. What I've learned from this experience is a lot about my family, because in doing those applications, we had to show a particular need. I've learned that the Taliban doesn't like my family. The Taliban doesn't like, of course, people who are educated and believe in equality and women's rights and all the things that we believe in here. Particularly, they don't like people who believe in freedom. And so that would be my family. And so I learned that members of my family had been poisoned and beaten and bombed and executed and beheaded and killed in all kinds of terrible ways and tortured, and that those folks are now back in power in the country, the people that did that to them. So there is a greater risk to my family being over there. My family is educated. They're teachers and lawyers and business people. And my uncle was the governor of Kandahar, which is the largest province in Afghanistan. And so there are definitely people that are after us, I guess. So hopefully these applications will go through. Hopefully they'll be able to come over here. Hopefully there's a happy ending. And I guess stay tuned. I'd love to share more about that as I learn more about the process. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Parween. First person history means a whole lot, and I'm so sorry what you've had to go through and your family. It's terrifying. Our next speaker is the person who Parween went to for assistance at the WVU Law School. She is a colleague of my husband, a professor there. Alison Peck is a graduate of Yale Law School and has an LLM degree in addition to her JD from the University of Arkansas. And she also has worked privately in the bar doing international arbitration. But now one of her jobs at the law school, in addition to teaching, is she heads the immigration clinic. And she helps people like Parween and her family to rescue people. I guess she's co-director of the Immigration Law Clinic, but I hope she's going to tell us a little bit about her trip to work with people on military bases. One of the things that Ellie was not able to get to was this concept of lily padders, people who got out on those fateful few days and then got stuck in other countries or on military bases and have to prove that they're really who they say they are. So Alison, I don't see you in my view, but is Alison?
I'm here.
Okay, great. Great, Alison, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you to Parween. It was really thanks to Parween that I ended up getting involved in this, and the Immigration Law Clinic ended up getting involved in working with Afghan people. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be involved. So as Barbara mentioned, I did end up spending several weeks over break, 3 weeks, working at a military base in Wisconsin, where Afghan people are being housed. Many are still being housed at a variety of military bases after having been on the relocation flights out of Afghanistan in August. So I want to talk a little bit about what the immigration situation is, what the immigration pathways are for people. And I think it may be most helpful to talk about that in two separate groups. First being the people who did make it onto those relocation flights and are currently in the United States at military bases. There is probably the way I would break it down is then the second group would be people who have not arrived in the United States. And so that might be people who are still in Afghanistan and are looking for a way to leave. And then the second group would be people who have already managed to leave Afghanistan and are now, as Barbara mentioned, in Qatar or in Turkey or in Pakistan, waiting and looking for an opportunity to leave those countries and in case of our interest, to come to the United States. So I have some familiarity with both. I'm actually representing clients in both of those two categories, people who are now here and people who are not yet here. And so I'll speak, kind of generally about what those options are. But I also am happy to share some of the things that I learned while working with Afghan people at the base. It was really an extraordinary experience being at the base and working with people. I mean, one of the things that really impressed me is how many talented, in young professionals there are in the group that is here that has been relocated. They worked with us side by side in the legal clinic there in the base. There were a lot of young people who are pretty fluent in English, and some of whom had some legal background in Afghanistan. And so they would we called them guest volunteers. The Afghans at the base were called guests. And so many of them would show up and just kind of work 40, 60 hours a week. As translators, as paralegals, as guides, whatever it was that their countrymen or the attorneys and other professionals at the base needed them to do. So there's really a tremendous wealth of talent that has arrived here, and people who have really just made extraordinary commitment, extraordinary sacrifices throughout their lives to stand up for what they believe in, including and maybe especially the rights of women. Some of the most talented professional women who, even knowing that this risk, that they always lived with this risk. I mean, the Taliban, of course, never went away and was always in control in certain provinces. And so just hearing their stories was really extraordinary to me. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about that now and more in the question session if we get there. Of course, I can't give any identifying information, but I can give you an idea of some of the stories that we heard. So just to kind of frame what we were doing there and what the pathways are for, first of all, starting with people who are here. So people who arrived on these on the evacuation flights, the relocation flights, were not, they didn't go through sort of the normal visa process to come here. There wasn't time. It was an emergency situation. So people who were at risk kind of just got the word. I mean, many people got the word and rushed to the airport. People described pretty horrific scenes in the airport of, sort of a stampede trying to get into the airport and onto the planes. Families got separated. People were killed. So it was a pretty terrible scene. The ones who did arrive here they came to several U.S. military bases. There were tens of thousands of people. I don't have a precise number, but definitely tens of thousands of people who came and have been housed at these different bases. And so now they are in a position where the U.S. government is asking them to make some kind of an application for a permanent status. The status they've been given now is not really a status at all. They've just been sort of what they call paroled into the country, meaning they're allowed here on a temporary basis physically without any legal status. So they are applying for some type of legal status. That falls into a few basic categories. One is asylum, which most people have heard about and are familiar with. And we spent, myself and students were with me for one of the 3 weeks that I was there. We spent time sitting there and interviewing people about their stories to identify the circumstances that would qualify them for asylum. And I'm happy to talk more about the grounds for that later as time permits. But we really did hear some truly horrific stories about things that people and their family members had been through. In particular, some pretty horrific stories aimed at women, and especially women and girls attempting to work or to be educated. So asylum is one of the main pathways. There are a number of people who are eligible for what's called special immigrant visas. This is a special program, and it's been expanded for Afghans this year for people who have worked for the U.S. government or for a contractor for the U.S. government. Many of the people eligible for special immigrant visas are men, although not all. A woman might have been an interpreter, for example. But a number of them were fighters in one way or another who were working with or for the United States in this battles over a series of years. And so there are people, family members, spouses, children who are eligible for status as derivatives of a special immigrant visa holder. So while it's a relatively smaller number of women who are eligible for that status, there is a large number of women and girls who may obtain that status through their spouse. There
Alison?
are occasional other pathways that might be available. We did meet someone who had qualified for what they call the diversity lottery. There are a certain number of visas eligible for people from different countries. So there is a small handful that are eligible for that. Some people might have an immediate relative, a spouse or a 21, an adult child who is already a US citizen. In those cases, that person would be able to sponsor them on a family-based visa. So those are opportunities that are available for Afghans that are currently here. It is a time-consuming process to go through all of this. And we're talking, of course, tens of thousands of people who are going to need legal representation in order to make these applications. So the need for the bar is overwhelming. I'm hopeful that Congress.
Thank you so much, Alison. We need to move on to our speaker. Thank you very, very much. It's really very important to have that firsthand knowledge that you've gained through your professional work. Our next speaker is Renee Corbett, who is an outreach worker for the Catholic Charities, Refugee Resettlement and Immigration Services. And that is the main group that has been certified to provide services for refugees in West Virginia and helping them get resettled in our state. They have helped other kinds of refugees for years, Vietnamese, and so on. And we're really, Renee would be the next person or the next group. And actually there are a few more groups that are seeking certification from the federal government. But Renee can tell you what it's like for somebody who might come to the United States and what it's like for somebody who would come to West Virginia. Welcome, Renee, and thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm really honored to be part of this group because I think I play just a really tiny role, but I'm really honored to be able to present about what I do. Catholic Charities West Virginia is the only refugee resettlement agency that operates in the state of West Virginia at the moment. The way refugee resettlement works is there are 9 national resettlement agencies, and then all of these resettlement agencies have local affiliates. There's about 350 to 400 of those local affiliates. So in West Virginia, we only have one local affiliate, which is my organization. And there is one person who does that role, which is me. So any refugee that comes into the state of West Virginia gets resettled by me at the moment. The way resettlement works, and this is not only for Afghan refugees, it's for refugees from any country, is we find out that they're coming. We make sure they have safe and affordable housing that's furnished, they have toiletries, food, cleaning supplies, anything that they need so that when they arrive, they can feel quite comfortable as they make their huge transition into a brand new life. Over a 90-day period, we have to provide a number of services. These could include getting them a social security card, making sure they have all of the identification documents that they would need to be able to get a job, getting their kids enrolled in school, teaching people how to use public transportation, how to go to the grocery store, how to apply for public benefits that they're eligible for, and how to have a job and how to really make a successful and independent life in the United States. And it's an incredibly fulfilling job that we have, but it can be quite challenging for many of our clients because they're coming from lives that are quite different to the expectations of life that we have in the United States. Specifically related to the Afghan evacuee situation is the numbers I have of as of January 3rd, the US evacuated about 85,000 people. Of those 85,000 people, 63,000 of them have been resettled in communities around the United States. So that means that about 21,000 people are still awaiting resettlement in the bases. The goal with all of the refugee resettlement agencies is that by February 15th, every person who was at one of the bases will be resettled in a community. West Virginia was only able to accept a small number of Afghan evacuees. We accepted 5 of the 85,000. But they're being resettled across the United States, there are a lot of needs for our new evacuees. One of the primary needs is that people need to be able to get a job. This can be challenging if English is not one of your strong suits. For people who have strong education backgrounds, you know, they'll be all right. But for many of our evacuees, they don't speak English. And they are expected to be able to support themselves within 90 days. That's really hard, you know, to be able to go to a new country. You have a small amount of support from the US government and a small amount of support from your state government. But it really, the refugees rely on the support of their communities to be able to really jumpstart their lives in the United States. Just to give you some numbers, because I'm a numbers person, when a refugee comes to the US, the federal government gives them $1,225 as their good luck during your resettlement. Here is some money, and that's given to them over a 90-day period. So it's about $400 a month. I think we all know that you cannot survive on $400 a month. Refugees are eligible to apply for Medicaid, SNAP, which is food stamps, and then also refugee cash assistance. So that number varies across different states about how much money that they can get. But really, it's still not enough to be able to support yourself without having to work. So one of my requests for this is that if you are a person who wants to know how can I help and how can I support people who are refugees who are coming to the United States or to West Virginia in general, is to, one, if you're an employer, to be willing to take on and hire refugees. They are eligible to work. Another would be to volunteer with organizations like mine to teach cultural orientation lessons so that you can help the refugees quickly learn about life in the United States so that they're able to help make their lives as independent and as successful as possible. I know that I'm already going over my time, so I will cut myself off now. But I wanted to thank you all for the work that you're doing. And if you are interested, please reach out to my organization, Catholic Charities West Virginia, and I would be happy to connect you to some refugee families who could use your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renee. Maybe you could put your contact information in the chat, because I bet there's a large number of people that are participating in this program, and I bet you'll get some takers on your request.
I will type it in now.
Okay, I'm very delighted to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Manal AlNatour, who is Associate Professor of Arabic Studies and Director of WVU's Division Arabic Studies program. She is going to talk to us about what appears on the screen, Afghan Women at the Crossroad, a Cultural Perspective. I think that's so important. She got her degree, her doctorate, her Ph.D. in comparative literature from the University of Arkansas. She has done a great deal of research and teaching and writing about Arab women and also about the Arab Spring. So thank you and she's also, I want to say, been a faculty associate at the Center for Women and Gender Studies at WVU, which I think is very important. Anyway, welcome, Dr. AlNatour, and we look so forward to hearing how you can, she's our last speaker, and she's going to tie all this together for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and a real honor. Maybe even my part is the smallest part. So I must point out that this presentation is based on research that is still in its initial stages. And I thank everyone who organized for this panel and also for my chair, Dr. Thompson, who got me also involved in this very interesting topic. This is related to my research, and also part of it is also about refugees, and I published on Syrian women refugees. So related, absolutely, within gendered roles and women's rights. The topic, as you see, Afghan women at the crossroad, cultural perspective. In this very brief presentation, rather than focusing on Afghan women's victimization, I would like to draw on several examples from online resources. I was not lucky enough to meet all these intelligent people who met many Afghan women already. But also I was lucky to get in touch with some Afghan women and conduct some personal interviews. I would like to shed light on their agency as well as strategies of nonviolent resistance. So the main question, in other words, in this brief presentation that I tried to answer, how did Afghan women respond to oppression? And to reflect on this question, I build on Patricia Collins' work on intersectionality, her examination of intersectionality in Black women's lives, when she has her approach to framing women's agency as dialectic and dialogical. So I'm going to go ahead and after a brief presentation, brief introduction, introduce each approach and give you an example on each from Afghan women's lives and how they respond to oppression. Absolutely, it's well known for us that men, women, and children are the most vulnerable people affected by the brutality of war. And with the Taliban taking control of the state, the situation of women is worsening by the day. Yet, I heard from them stories that Afghan women rise from ashes to build a life for themselves and people around them, challenging gender roles and contesting the state's oppression. Women in general and women who live in a war zone in particular have been struggling multiple oppressions. Afghan women are not exceptional. And in her examination, as I mentioned, Patricia Collins of intersectionality in Black women's lives, she states that the oppression that Black women face is absolutely multiple. And it is within the dynamic interplay of the axis of class, gender, nation, race, and sexuality. And absolutely, this applies to Afghan women. The two approaches that Patricia Collins has in framing women's agency are the dialectical and the dialogical. The dialogical, just like what we heard from Alison when she said she was surprised that there was a big number of women coming from different professions that she saw, and they master English language. So this approach, absolutely, the dialogical applies to these women, the very educated women, women who have solid background in gendered roles, women who have clear thought and theory about feminism. And they tie this intellectual work with their activism in order to implement strategic change in the society and affecting an actual change. The examples that I found so far of these women, intellectual women and feminists, in other words, who build their actions on theory and action, most of them are organizations that are led by women. So these women try to effect change through their organizations. And absolutely, these organizations, the main goal behind them is to support women's independence. The main organization, or the most famous one that I found so far, is Women for Afghan Women. And this is the largest network of women's protection. It serves women and it provides them with protection. An example of a woman who works in these organizations, her name is Pashtana, let's suppose. She's a political right activist and a teacher in Afghanistan. She details what's happening for women today under the newest Taliban regime. The state has threatened her life, her family, and everyone associated with her. And she has been moving from one place to another place as she fears for her own safety. What she was doing, she was running 18 schools since many years. And But now she has only one open, and absolutely it's through her network. And she has right now 100 students who come in and out either in the morning or in the afternoon. But such example of Pashtana's work absolutely is representative of these women who are involved in these organizations that support women's rights and independence. And their priority in most cases is keeping girls in school, keeping girls and helping them to keep their education, even with the Taliban over their heads. So the really impressive work that I found there. The second category is the dialectical practices. And the dialectical practices, like the women's agency does not require that intellectual thought, does not require that foundation in women's and gender studies. It is just a response, in other words, to daily life experiences. Although they had no prior experience, in other words, in active involvement in politics. Women who, could be housewives with no education, but they responded, they appeared on the scene with the outbreak of the Taliban taking over. A very clear example was a woman from a village got involved in a work with prosecutors to help gather evidence about abuse cases involving women and children, and she was reporting them to Human Rights Watch agents.
Manal, I'm going to need to jump in, and do you have something you want to wrap up, maybe in a sentence or two?
I want to say that although this is still initial research, that I'm really glad to see light, by the end of the tunnel, that there were, although there is a lot of oppression, multiple oppressions they are facing, but these women is still resisting oppression, even when their lives are in danger. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for the enlightenment that you have given us. I'm Sue Barazi. Again, I'm one of the moderators. As you have seen, as you have heard, I think every speaker can go on and teach us a lot more, because we basically touched upon the highlights of what they know and what's going on. So I'd like to, this is a topic that's dear and near to our heart, to all of us, and the one that I was struck with most, Alison, when she said, look, most of the refugees she dealt with were highly educated young people, anxious and eager to work. And we in the state of West Virginia need these people so badly. As an immigrant myself, as I've dealt with many refugees and immigrants coming here, they will make our state better. So the question is now, first, let's hear if we have any questions from the audience, and then the follow-up question would be, is my question, what shall we do next to help these Afghani women once they get here? And maybe what can we do, as Dr. Smeal said, to help them in their own country? But our focus should be, what should we do here? So Amy, do we have any questions?
There are no questions in the chat so far. I don't know if anyone.
Yeah, there is.
Is there? Okay, let me.
Janine Brielle, what can we do to expand the number of refugees that can be resettled in West Virginia?
There we go. Okay.
It's an excellent question. Who can answer that?
Maybe Alison?
Or
maybe Alison can
Renee
help.
might be best. Renee might be in a better position than me to discuss that, since we deal on the immigration side, but the refugee resettlement is a little bit different.
Go ahead.
On that, at the moment, West Virginia has a policy called the U.S. tie policy. So any refugee that is getting resettled in the state must have a U.S. tie, which is a family member or a friend, not necessarily a family member, who is living in the state of West Virginia. So to increase the number of refugees that we're able to resettle, we need to grow our immigrant community here, who has connections to refugees around the world that need to be resettled.
Well, if I also, as a person who just completed my term, and I am one of the founder of West Virginia Interfaith Refugee Ministry, we work with one of the agency, Episcopal Migration Ministry. The changing the rules a little bit on how we can receive refugees, but now we're going with highest. We need to have, and we're looking at a church adopt a family, because as Renee said, 90-day of financial support doesn't cut it at all for a family. We need a lot more, so we can work together to bring more refugees into West Virginia. God knows we need it. Is there any question, Barbara? Additional questions?
Yeah, Caitlin Aloise is asking, Allison, you mentioned that you had examples of stories that will qualify for asylum that you heard. Can you give some of the examples?
Sure. So to qualify for asylum, the standard is that you have to show that you have been or would be persecuted based on your race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So being a woman is often classified as a particular social group for asylum purposes, especially an educated woman or a professional woman. So I have many stories, but one that comes to mind, I'll just share it. This is just one example, not even the worst example, just a representative one. There's a young woman that I worked with who she was a dentist in Afghanistan. And she said that she saw many people having bad infections and even dying from badly treated abscesses and so forth. And that motivated her to become a dentist. So she had completed her training. She was working in a dental clinic in Kabul. And her under the Taliban, women are not allowed to treat men. But in her clinic, she did. She treated both men and women. And so in the middle of August, after the Taliban came in, she didn't think that they would come to her clinic, but they did. One day, a couple days after the Taliban had come in, she was working in her clinic and she was working on a male patient. And the Taliban came in. She heard them at the door. There was a guard at the door. They forced their way in. They came to her, saw her working on a male patient, and they yelled at her and said, why are you treating a man? And they had some kind of a metal rod, and they hit her. They beat her with the metal rod. They also beat the man, and they dragged him out. And she did not know what became of the man. They destroyed the equipment in her clinic, and they told her, if we ever catch you doing this again, we'll kill you. And so she ran home, managed to find someone to give her a ride home, went home, and left Afghanistan a few days later. That's just one example.
Also, I just remember to piggyback on the first question, ask what can we do to bring more Afghani refugees into West Virginia? There is something called the Sponsor Circle. And the Sponsor Circle, basically anybody can go to www.thesponsorcircle.org. And what it is, it's actually a way of speeding up bringing a refugee, Afghani specifically, to West Virginia. And it will actually take 5 adults or a church, as I said earlier, or a group of people who will commit. They have to fill up the application, and they have to go through the whole process. But it takes any 5 adults who can come together and provide, as Renee said, based on the government requirement, the housing, they do cultural orientation, everything else. But that is one way. The Sponsor Circle is one way of speeding up bringing refugees, Afghani specifically, into the state of West Virginia. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple more in the chat. Colleen asked, can the U.S. Thai policy be used to help the students that are here to bring their families here? Some of the family members are displaced in other countries, some are still in Afghanistan. And to contextualize that a little bit, the 5 Afghan refugees that Renee referenced earlier are 5 students that WVU has kind of welcomed here, who are currently doing English language programs this semester and will then soon be matriculated fully into the university. And I know that these women came by themselves. They're between the ages of 18 and 22, and they came here without any family members, and their family members are spread, all over the world. And so can that, if you have a connection to a refugee already in West Virginia, can these students that we have at WVU be able to bring some of their own family here to West Virginia?
Absolutely. A U.S. tie does not have to provide any financial. They have no financial obligation when they are bringing a new refugee into the U.S. So if those family members are able to gain refugee status or humanitarian parolee status, then they may be eligible to be the U.S. tie.
I
Okay,
might
Dr.
add as well that there are two separate questions. One is whether someone would be eligible to be resettled in West Virginia, which the U.S. tie would help. The other issue would be whether they can get refugee status or humanitarian parole status, as Renee mentioned, which is what would give them permission to travel to the United States. So that is a whole separate process that happens on the immigration and refugee approval front. And that would be separate from whether or not they're eligible to settle in West Virginia.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
If I-
Smeal. Trying to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. We've been helping a lot to try to get feminist leaders out. And right now, we estimate about 40,000 Afghans are in a third country. In other words, they, instead of coming directly to the United States, they were sent to another country. And we're trying to get them out of those countries and into the United States. The State Department has been working with us, and they have been trying to get leaders out. For example, women judges, there were 260 or some of them. They were killing them. The Taliban was, if they could find them, would kill them. So we got, a lot of them were helped to get escape. They have closed all women's organizations. I mean, this is when you say brutal, it is so horrible. And they just captured in the major cities. There have been demonstrations led by women, and then they capture them. And this week they captured 3, and they've either tortured them, some have been killed, etc. Now, what does a group like us do? One, we try to help to get the people out. We think there needs to be a change in the laws and the regulations. In other words, the regulations and the laws are not really handling this emergency situation. Everything goes too slow. Everything is, I mean, it's just outrageous. I can't say it enough. So what we're trying to do is help to change the regulations to meet this situation. The reason they were sent to third countries to check their background to make sure they weren't, the Taliban or something, and before they came to the United States. But they're keeping them there awfully long, and it should be shortened. So what we're trying to do, and I would love to talk to some of you off site, is, for example, how do these quotas get established, for refugees? It's the House and Senate Judiciary Committee. They both have subcommittees that are working on it. There's actually quota systems. We have got to get those quota systems changed for this emergency. This is a humanitarian crisis. Anyway, so we do that kind of thing. Plus, we're trying to amplify the voices of the leaders there, women there who are so courageous. And we have got to have the UN and the United States condition humanitarian control on better treatment of Afghans, and especially Afghan women and girls.
Thank you, Dr. Smeal. It's actually, I have had several conversations with Senator Capito and Senator Manchin, and we're working together with them, with the interfaith community, trying to ask, because there was a proposed law in the Senate to change the status specifically for Afghan refugees, which it has not been voted on. Had that happened, we would have actually a whole lot better situation in bringing refugees into the United States, and actually, and Afghani or non-Afghani, because Dr. Manal would tell you that the Syrian crisis is a horrendous one, and it's always the women and the children that seem to get the brunt of every war that goes on. So this is a long conversation. I think we just started to deal with it here. I thank you all for your efforts. Barbara, you are amazing. Thank you for getting the group together, along with Amy, Sally, Leslie, everybody who worked so hard to get us all together. I really think this is just a start of a conversation. And the next one should be, what can we do collectively to help with resettlement? And as Dr. Smeal says, change the law. The only way we can do it. Thank you all. Thank you everybody for joining us, and we appreciate your time. Have a good evening, everyone.